Hey, it's Filbert. So, first off, happy holidays if you're watching this before Christmas 2023. I'm making a video this time talking about choices in games and specifically what makes choices good or great. And I'll be talking about both video game and board games and using examples of both to highlight what I mean as I explain my way through this. I think the first thing to point out is there are two types of choices for me when I think about this: narrative and mechanical. So, narrative is pretty self explanatory. Usually in video games, like you're talking about the dialogue tree, or even as you play the game, if there's characters you don't like, you might just ignore them and not interact with them. When it comes to tabletop, often we're looking at like a role playing game, Dungeons and Dragons or something, and just how you interact with a DM or other players. And even like when you're playing a tabletop, a lot of times there's still like a structure, especially the DM is running aspects of the characters you're interacting with and how they're going to respond to narrative decisions you're making. And then you have mechanics, and mechanics are going to vary from game to game and genre. So you have mechanics like when you level up in an RPG, how do you spend stats? What abilities do you unlock? If you have movement in a game, whether it's rolling dice and you can move that many spaces, or a turn-based game where you can move 30 meters, how do you spend that movement? Where do you go? That's all about choices. If you have an attack that has multiple ways to use a weapon that has multiple types of attacks, like what attack are you going to use? And primarily for this video, most of what I'm talking about is framed around kind of mechanical choices more than narrative. So just kind of keep that in mind as I continue on. So it might sound silly, but I like to think about what makes a good choice. And thinking about this, I kind of came down to four different aspects, which I think highlight good to great decision making in a game. I'm going to use games to kind of highlight and give examples to explain what I mean. I also want to point out, literally not every choice needs to have all of these, or it needs to be like a great choice. When I play a game like Age of Empires, when I'm building workers at the beginning, like that is a clear, brain dead, simple choice. I don't need like every unit I build in an RTS or every dialogue choice I make in an RPG to be like this critical pinnacle climax. Clearly, there's choices that are going to build up to a climax, and it really is going to vary from game to game and depend on genre, or especially like board game to video game, how often you need great choices. It's just like one of those things. Pie is great, but you don't want to eat pie every meal, every sitting. Same for great choices. Not every decision you're making in a game needs to be like the pinnacle of what makes a good decision. So the first aspect, I think, is impact. How impactful the choice is. I know this sounds pretty obvious, but I do think it is one of the hardest things to pull off in a satisfying way. A choice simply needs to have impact. One thing everyone hates in real life is busy work, and you do not want busy work in a game. You don't want to just be doing a bunch of clicking, a bunch of nonsense. Again, going back to Age of Empires, the whole game's not about just building workers and getting the economy going. Like any RTS, like Age of Empires, StarCraft, that is just an aspect, and that plays into like the bigger scope of choices. A go-to example for this is going to be RPGs. When you unlock a new skill or feat, often that decision is going to unlock more aspects of gameplay, give you the ability to do more complex tactics in combat. Dragon Age Origins, kind of your typical Western RPG, during certain levels, you get to unlock talents for your characters. These can be used from unlocking passive skills to completely new abilities for combat, and these decisions matter. An early unlock for a rogue in the game might be Dirty Fighting, a talent which stuns a target for up to 4 seconds. Once you get this talent, it makes combat more dynamic. Stopping an enemy from attacking 4 seconds already significant, but popping this right before the enemy is about to cast a spell or do a ability themselves is rewarding. That unit not being able to use that ability or spell they just popped has impact that you feel directly in combat. Which brings me to the second part of what makes a great choice: reward. As I just stated, you want your choice to have some type of reward. With Dirty Fighting, using it to cancel other enemies' abilities rewards you mechanically. It directly hampers enemies on their turn, and it makes it for a satisfying gameplay loop. It is also an example of allowing the player to use their skill in the game. Now, obviously, this is a fairly simple example, but it takes skill, like to recognize an enemy is about to cast a spell or an ability and to interrupt that. And it also starts to take a higher amount of skill to recognize different types of enemy abilities, because there may be abilities you see them about to cast. You have this short window to trigger the ability, and you're thinking like, do I interrupt this one or do I let this one go through because I know they have scarier abilities or spells they could use? And that just plays into a rewarding gameplay loop. You have an impactful ability and you can develop a skill to use it in a more rewarding way, and it just is a satisfying experience for a player to go through. Now, this isn't always a bad thing, but in a lot of RPGs, when you level up, sometimes you get like those boring upgrades that are just like 5%, 10% increase to like this stat or bonus or damage. Now, again, not every decision needs to be like unlocking a new active ability you get to use, because if that's always the case, especially in RPG, you quickly become overwhelmed with too many options, or you just can't fit all this knowledge into your brain. So just when you unlock something that is a simple like 10% buff to damage done, that's okay sometimes, but it is easy to fall into the trope of some games that becomes the primary feature of their upgrades, are just these passive stat upgrades, which I do not think are nearly as rewarding, and you don't want too many of those. You need the occasional upgrade and reward that has that satisfaction where you get to use it and feel its direct impact in the game. Let's vector off from leveling a character in RPGs to another type of choice. The board game Vindication, you have the ability to take control of a location on the board as an action when you visit the location. There are two reasons why you want to do this in this game. If you control a location at the end of the game, you get 2 honor, which is also victory points, how you win the game. And also, when someone uses the location you control, you receive 2 honor instantly. On your turn, when you're trying to consider a good move, one aspect of this game is considering what your opponents might do. I'll show this in detail a little bit later in the video, but you can make a choice to upgrade your mount in the game, which gives you increased movement and also increases your honor. But if you know your opponent might be about to upgrade their mount too, controlling that region on your turn gives you your rewards, but then on their turn, if they now visit that location, and so it doesn't affect them at all, you controlling it, other than you get 2 victory points, which builds on your reward of using that location, got you victory points, increased your gameplay by allowing you to move further, and is built on your previous decision of controlling that location by rewarding you with more victory points and honor. Which takes us into the third aspect of what makes good choices, building upon each other. And I think Vindication is a great example of a board game where you continue to build upon your previous choices. And board games are most transparent with this, with board games that have what are called tableaus. These are usually areas in front of a player which are adding components, often cards. These components start to trigger and proc off each other, creating combos or just enhancing your previous actions. Race for the Galaxy, Terraforming Mars, Scythe are other great examples of games as tableaus. But we'll look back at Vindication because I think this is a good example of impact, reward, building upon each other, and what I think is the final part of what makes a good decision, a hard decision. What I mean by a hard choice is there should be 2 or more things you want to do on your turn because they are all impactful, rewarding, and build upon your previous decisions. When you start to hit that in a game, I think that is what makes great decision making. So this is the board game Vindication. I have it set up in a 2-player state, and I'm just going to go over why this is one of my favorite board games. And a big reason that is purely the decision-making space. And this is kind of an example highlighting impact, reward, build up, and as well as a hard choice because you have multiple choices you kind of want to do. So for the purposes, it's going to be the green player's turn. Second player's about to go. About half the board is revealed. And again, you don't need to know how to play. Obviously, if you know how to play, it's going to highlight it a lot more. But on the green player's turn, one of the things they need to do is they need to activate themselves or a companion. They also likely want to visit a location. So the green player, they currently have a movement of 3 because they've already upgraded their mount. And they're looking at this board trying to think, they have some cubes all over. So you're looking at, what do you want to start to build to? Do you want to start getting more companions, more traits? They have 2 companions, 1 trait. They have a spot and vision. So do they want to start going relics? If you look at one of their companions, you may distribute exactly 3 influence from this companion onto relics you control. So a good idea is they have the Arcane Tower next to them. If they wish, they could, as a free action, remove these 2 cubes to get a vision, to then get a relic. But they might be looking at what the other players doing. And in this case, they have a companion that lets them increase their movement by 1 every time they activate them. They've used them already 3 times. They haven't upgraded their movement. They have 3 in strength already. And if we look at the board, there's one spot where both adjacent to, or the green player's adjacent to, they're 1 away from, which they could upgrade their mount. And upgrading your mount, if they would upgrade their mount, it would increase their movement to 3, 4 if they use them, and also give them 3 victory points, which would move them further up the track. Going relics makes for a lot of sense for this player and is a good move. But if we stop and kind of look at the board and think about it a bit, we look at the white player. They've been using this ability on this person at least 3 times, which every time they use them, they add 2 strength, and they get to move additional movement. They currently have a movement of 1. They've not upgraded to a mount yet. If I'm kind of making a decision right now as a green player, a good idea might be to upgrade my mount because we have the strength to upgrade it because it costs 3 strength. We have 3 cubes here, which would give me a movement of 4 and get me 4 more honor. And I could also take control of this spot, which would give me 2 more honor because I do have conviction if I think my opponent will use their ability and want to upgrade their mount, because currently this is the only spot on the board they can upgrade. They likely want to get relics too, because relics cost them less and they are in a state they can start moving cubes to vision. But if they want to get a relic 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, they cannot get to this location to be adjacent now. And if they want to keep utilizing this ability for better effect and to start getting more range, if they move here and activate to get their mount, it makes this ability even more potent. But because they activate that spot, I would gain 2 more honor. And again, that is giving me reward for options based on what they're gonna do. At the start, like I was saying, I could have went straight for the Arcane Tower to get a relic and upgrade it. And again, I could go with the one equipped, I could go with a random one. But that is just an example in this state, and a fairly simple one of, on my turn as a green player, just quickly looking at the board and not even kind of figuring out what other cards are out there right now. I had, I think, 2 really good options, because Vindication for me is a game about choices. And when it comes to your turn, you often have 2 or more choices that are going to have impact. That impact is going to have a reward, often with honor, and getting honor is how you win the game, and can proc other abilities. It has build up because as you play the game, you are getting cards. These cards start to build your tableau that start to proc off each other and make really good combos. A core thing which really elevates board games or video games for me is when you have the hard choices that aren't hard because it's like a skill issue or anything, but they're hard because you want to do more than one thing at once. And you want to do more than one thing at once because both aspects are fun and rewarding, not because you want to do one, but you're just constrained by the rules, so you can't. So going back to video games and talking about building upon each other, as far as a choice goes, video games, you're almost always building out previous choices. Again, this can be narrative decisions. Previous decisions you made earlier in the game might affect how NPCs interact with you, or even how you interact with them, depending on choices they made within the story of the game. And simply, you start to build synergy as you start to unlock abilities, passives, whatever, tech upgrades in some games. Stuff starts to synergize with each other, and previous actions become enhanced. You start to make combos, and it just builds for like a satisfying gameplay loop. And an example of building up to kind of a climax in a game is I'm going to look at a game I adore, Shogun Total War II. You start off controlling a feudal Japanese clan. Often you start with only 2 locations on the map, and the goal is to conquest and eventually take over all of Japan. Over the course of the game, you're presented with different choices when it comes to unit to train, what buildings to construct, how to plan your invasions, or when you're being invaded, like where are you going to move armies, how are you going to defend, whether it's on the tactical campaign map to the RTS battle mode. The climax of the game, though, is called Realm Divide, and that is when all surviving NPC clans unite an ally and declare war on you. This is often at a point when you either take over Kyoto and control it for 4 turns, or you max out your clan's influence, which is done by like conquests and winning battles and taking locations. Now, if it's your first game, you might not realize Realm Divide is coming, but if you played the game before, it is something you know that the game is building up to. And the choices that you've made when the game hits this climax, like that is a huge buildup of this game. Is what type of armies did you choose to specialize? What areas of the map did you choose to take over when this triggers? And all of that builds to this big climax. And this is an example of like the Realm Divide isn't a choice inherently, but it's all the choices that went into this, because the second turn of the game, you can't just trigger this. You know, you're taking over areas or key locations like become the Shogun. So it's like, how did you get to this spot? And I think all that build up to this big event makes for a great climax, and it is very rewarding to see, all right, Japan now is all against me. I have these armies, these provinces. Let's see if all my previous decisions will lead me to success. Can I survive the start of Realm Divide? Did I build the right armies to have the right economy and everything going? Did I prepare for this, knowing that's about to come? And I mentioned it in the clip I shown earlier, Vindication, but I do think it is important that you need hard choices in video games and board games. You need 2 or more things you want to do on your turn or as you're just playing the game. And that is what really highlights like good games to great games for me. Baldur's Gate 3 has been a massive success, and I think a big reason of this is because they have so many great decision-making opportunities, both mechanically but also narratively. When I played Baldur's Gate 3 for the first time, at the end of Act 1, Act 2, and like kind of the midpoint end of Act 3, I was hit with very hard choices that were extremely hard to make, like if you were immersed in the game like I was. I think the game did a great job of making these choices hard by doing a few things. The first was often each side had a reason for their view. It wasn't just someone was mustache twirling evil. It wasn't clearly just good versus evil. There's some gray areas in how some characters behaved, or they just had solid reasoning. Even if they were doing an evil act, you could understand why. The second is, as a player, you weren't given perfect information. You're trying to piece information together. You might know some people are telling you half-truths or hiding aspects of information they know, and you just have to like think this out through yourself to decide who you're going to side with, what you're going to do. And finally, the choices were often very impactful, if not absolute. Just depending on what you choose, characters might die, people might die, you might lose companions forever, gain new companions. And these were hard choices because they had impact, reward, and they kept building upon each other. All the stuff you did leading up to the end of one of those acts came to fruition during these choices. And to kind of wrap this up and come to a conclusion, I think all those 4 factors, impact, reward, building upon each other, and having hard choices, are what make for good choices overall in a game. And as I say at the top, not literally every choice in a game needs to be like this. Specifically narrative ones, should have a build up, especially when it comes to story. You shouldn't constantly be making these big, massive decisions with massive impact all the time. And it's going to vary from game to game. How often you need these great choices that build in all 4 of these aspects is, again, going to be dependent. Is a board game, video game? What type of genre is the game? That said, I think it's still, you can enjoy games that don't even have great choices in them. Chess is a good example for me. I can go back and play chess. I play chess occasionally and enjoy my time. And it certainly doesn't fit the bill when it comes to what I lay out as great decision making, but also, no hate against chess. I played it for a long time. Chess isn't my favorite game of all time or something I keep going back to. It's a game I enjoy. I like because a lot of other people like it, and it's simple enough. You can just play it with a lot of people compared to some of my board games where you have that stronger barrier of entry. I also want to highlight a lot of, particularly when it comes to RTS and 4X games, I think have these choices, and you get to a climax where even like Total War, that you get past good decision making and it just becomes brain dead, numb. And I think that's fun too, because I do think in some games you have that snowball effect where you get so big you can't fail. And when I'm playing something like Company of Heroes 3, you go through a 30-40 minute game that's head to head, neck to neck. You finally just basically cripple and destroy your opponent, but they don't surrender for some reason. And those last few minutes, it can just be cathartic, just wiping their troops, destroy their base. Same thing goes for Shogun or any Total War game. When you get past that aspect of no one can stop you now, it can be cathartic. I have this huge elite army and I'm just gonna fight a few battles and just slaughter everything. Though one, I do think, especially when it comes 4X games and some RTSs like Total War, those can also suffer from, when that goes on too long, it just starts to get boring. A lot of people struggle to sometimes finish some 4X games and Total War games. I know I do sometimes, because it's the writing's on the wall, you're gonna win, and it's fun to do that cathartic thing for a while. But if you have too much of that and you no longer have any great decisions to make that have these 4 aspects, it can get boring. And all that said, I again think choices are core to what make a game and a core to game design. And this isn't a formula, it's a structure. And what I mean by that is you can't just add all these aspects into a game or a decision and expect it to be good, but it's a structure I tend to look for in a game. Especially when I'm playing a board game, one of the first things I'm kind of picking apart when I'm playing a game, whether it's critically or I'm just having fun, is this solvable? Is there an objective best move? Because most of the time, I do not like that. That isn't fun for me. I like there to be interesting choices because of everything I said earlier, or I'm gonna get bored or frustrated or likely not enjoy my experience. And with that said, I'm Filbert. Let me know if you agree with my aspects of what I think make for good and great choices in game and game design. Do you have any games specifically you can share that you think highlight great choices in board games or video games? Or even what are aspects in a gameplay loop you look for? Like, what are some of your favorite aspects of a gameplay loop in a board game or video game? Specifically, if it's like a mechanic that you look for because you think it usually hits some of these, if not all of these. Hope to catch you next video. And again, happy holidays, and I'll catch you next time.